You've thought about the freedom of flying all your life. Now you're headed into retirement. You have the time, you have the money, and you have the abilities to do it. What's it like to be free in the air, and what's the process like to go through to become an aviation pilot? Today, we'll be talking to somebody who left the high rise of corporate America and is now a pilot enjoying freedom in retirement. Welcome to the Retirement Spy Studio, where we share experiences on a collaborative platform for those entering phase 2 of life and are ready to embrace this chapter with gusto and an attitude of carpe diem. You can find out more about us at www.theretirementspy.com or send us ideas and topics to hello@theretirementspy.com. Today, we're really pleased to have my friend Mike Kiepura on our show. Mike was previously a C-suite officer for a Fortune 250 company who's been retired for 11 years. He's originally from Chicago and has lived in Atlanta for 28 years. And Mike, in retirement, has taken up the hobby of flying, which I think is just such a wonderful thing. And he's got his pilot's license. Mike, tell me what first sparked your interest in becoming a pilot during retirement?
I've had a lifelong interest in flying. I can remember being a little kid on the south side of Chicago, riding my bike when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, hands free, and you'd be sitting up and you'd put your arms out and you're pretending that you were flying. And of course, back then, we were in the heart of the Vietnam War, so you saw a lot of planes flying and things. And actually World War II wasn't that far removed. And so I just, always thought flying was cool and something that I'd like to do someday. And then I can remember when my kids were probably 7, 8, 9 years old, reading them this book. We were on a ski vacation, and we got this book called The Flight of Passage. It was about a 16 and 17-year-old brothers in New Jersey who restored a Piper Cub, and they flew it from New Jersey out to LA and back. And the book is about the process of rebuilding it and their experiences flying. And I think that fueled my love of flying and desire to fly, and it certainly did in my son. And so when my son was, I want to say, a junior in high school, he and I both started taking flying lessons together. And he went all the way through. He got his pilot's license, and before he graduated, because I remember he incorporated it into his college essays. After a couple lessons, I stopped because I'd be up there flying with the instructor, and I'm thinking about, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I've got this going on at work, I've got this deadline. And I said, this really is not good that I'm thinking about things other than flying when I'm flying. So I stopped. He continued. He got his license. So it was a goal of mine. Yeah, I've found, when I was working, people would say, hey, what do you think you're going to do when you retire? And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I sure know I'm not going to figure it out while I'm working. So I was able to retire early. I retired at 58 and said, now's the time for me to go back to flying, and did that, bought a plane, got my license, and I've been, 10 years now with my license.
You're so smart. One of two bad things are going to happen. Either you're up in the air and you're neglecting the P&L of your Fortune 250 company, and bad things happen in your career. Your retirement may come a little bit earlier with that, or you're paying attention to something else. As I say, your P&L and the flight goes down. There's nothing good that's going to come out of that. So it's good that you had the governor on that. So
Absolutely.
when somebody wants to take up flying, and retirement's a great time to do it because you've got the time now, right? So when you're starting from scratch or starting from zero from somebody who wants to have that aspiration, they had the wings when they were on their bike as a kid. Give me an idea, starting from zero, what are the first steps to getting a pilot's license?
Well, I tell you, it's amazing how many airports there are around the country, even in more remote areas. As I'm flying across the country, I'm just amazed. You're never too far away from an airport. And most general aviation airports, that other than, that are just truly, really remote, they'll have some type of flight school. And typically it starts with a discovery flight. So you go, and a flight school will give you a discounted, hey, go up in an airplane. It's not necessarily a lesson. It's just go up and experience flight. And you hear about people giving those as Christmas presents, birthday presents, anniversary kind of thing. Somebody like me is saying, "Oh, I've always wanted to fly." And so, maybe my wife gets me a discovery flight. I mean, you can do it. I would imagine you could do it for maybe $200 kind of thing.
And what a great way to do that. So you're not committing to the process. Maybe you want to, maybe you don't. What a great gift idea to say, okay, I want to try this out, but I'm not ready to commit to it yet, right?
Exactly. And in fact, that's essentially what happened with me. Um, I've got a friend I've had for 50 years, high school friend. Um, he's out on the West Coast. Actually, we grew up together in Chicago. I went to the East Coast for school. He went to the West Coast. But our kids had an interest in RC, cars, helicopters, planes. And my son's a couple years older, and he was into that. And when we would visit, so they got into it, and they evolved to, they wanted to fly. They took flying lessons together. In fact, his son today is an F-35 pilot. Went to the Air Force Academy and is F-35 pilot. And so uh, my friend and his wife were visiting us. He knew that I'd been talking about, yeah, I'd like to do that. It's kind of like you talk about things, and sometimes, particularly me, you might need a little nudge. And so he was in town. He called up the local Cirrus, the type of plane I have, sales rep, and said, "Hey, let's take Mike up for a flight." So we went up, and we went up. So it was Bob, myself, and the sales rep. He's showing me all the things the plane can do. We're flying, and he's like, "Wow, I would really like to do this." So I effectively had a discovery flight, and so I then said, "Well, I want to do this. How do I get going?" So, I live in Atlanta. There's lots of airports, lots of general aviation airports. He said, "There's any number of flight schools. Why don't you go talk to this flight school? They've got instructors. They've got planes to rent." And so you start taking flying lessons.
So there's two parts to it. There's the written part, or we were joking earlier, you can go online now and do classes, or you can do in-person classes, I imagine. But then there's the actual flying of the airplane itself. It's two parts. Tell us about the written part and what you have to go through, the time, and then tell us a little bit about the actual flying and the time involved with that.
Okay, well, you start flying almost immediately,
Oh, wow.
because you're up with an instructor, and they're teaching you the most basic of elements of flying. And essentially simultaneously, for me, what I did, there were, and I assume there still are, services, back 10, 11 years ago when streaming wasn't as big. I mean, I got a binder that probably had, I'm going to say, 15 CDs, and you'd plop it into your hard drive, and it was basically online instruction. They'd be teaching you about different things. There's a little test at the end of it. You'd complete that, and you'd go on to the next one. So you'd kind of do a class session, get a lesson, fly, and then rinse and repeat. And obviously, you can get ahead on the written part because they're not necessarily synced up together. The written part is really getting you ready for the standardized FAA exam. And obviously, you are not a licensed pilot until you both pass the exam, get signed off from a aviation examiner that you're capable to fly the plane, and you have to have a medical. So I would say that between the studying and then the prepping really for the test, um, there's a fair amount of work that goes into it. And so, typically, I think on average, it takes the average pilot about 65 hours of instruction with your certified flight instructor. And that includes you review things on the ground. After I've gone through my online courses, I might have questions. We'd go over that. You'd prep. You'd say, okay, here's what we're going to do today. We're going to do this maneuver, that maneuver. Here's how you do it. You fly, and then you debrief. What did you do well? What did you not do well? How could you have done this better? Those kinds of things. But if I think about what's the ratio of, let's say, time with the instructor and probably time studying, it's probably something about 4-1. I'm going to guess. I really didn't keep track of it, and a lot of that was really prepping for the exam, because there's lots of things that the FAA makes you learn and do that. There's a lot involved in weather, identifying different types of clouds, different types of fog. I'm a big picture kind of guy. I can see that's a thunderstorm, that's a cumulonimbus. I don't want to go anywhere near that. But then there's cirrus clouds, there's stratus clouds, there's a lot of detail there that you need for the test, but I don't know that you really need to for flying. Same thing with fog. I know if I'm in fog, I can't see. I better have instruments, and I better be instrument rated to be
You
flying.
know, I know the good thing about retirement is you've got freedom and you've got time to do these things. But I also know a lot of people in our audiences are type A's or X type A's. And so the question will always be, is it 6 months? Is it a year? Is it 2 years? And in retirement, you can take it at your own pace. So, and there's an important component I want you to expand because I don't think people understand it. It's almost a three-part. It's the written, it's the actual flying itself, and then there's a medical part. And I think you're unique and you might want to make mention of that. So the two questions really, I want you to talk about the third part that we haven't talked about yet, the medical. But in a nutshell, 6 months, a year, 2 years, how long would it take the type A who wants to power through this? And we're not encouraging that because I think time is on your side when you're taking the time to get through this correctly as opposed to speeding through it.
Okay, for me, it took a year to get my license. Um, but in the middle of it, when I was going to get my medical, and the medical isn't really anything more than there's a aviation medical examiner, and there's lots of them around, and the flight school would help you get to one. They go through your medical history, and certainly, are you on any what medications you may be on? Well, I'm on a medication for a health issue that I've had for uh, 15 years. It's a very well known drug. It's advertised on TV, but the FAA, wanted a lot of information, and I was trying to comply with their request for information, and it was just taking forever. I think it's like dealing with any government agency. You're on their schedule, not your schedule. And fortunately, I was able to come. My sales rep for the plane I bought said, "You need to talk to this person," and he is a guy who's a longtime pilot. He was a retired, I want to say, heart surgeon cardiologist, had a lot of experience with the FAA. He goes, and I'd been trying to get my doctor, who knew nothing about aviation and what they required. He was able to write a letter to the FAA, a couple of paragraphs that, boom, just took care of it. And so I spent 3 or 4 months trying to hassle with the FAA back and forth. When he was able to write that letter for me, we cut through all the red tape. And so that got me to where I got back on track and got my license. I would say that the rate at which you can get your license is a function of how able you are financially to, if people are on a real budget and say, hey, I only have enough money to do one lesson every 2 weeks, one a month, because I found that when if there's too much of a gap from lesson 1 to lesson 2, on, you spend a lot of your next lesson kind of getting back to where you were when you finish the prior lesson. Ideally, if you can take a lesson, I would say once a week, that would be ideal. And if you can do it more rapidly than that, it's great. But that's going to be a function of, do you have the budget for it? Do you have the plane available for it? And do you have your instructor available for it? Because he or she is teaching other people. And then weather is a big factor, because we would schedule several lessons for the upcoming month. Well, if it's raining, or there's low ceilings, and now you can't safely fly. Hey, I was scheduled Wednesday at 1, but it's raining. Well, we're out of luck. So you're trying to keep on a regimen, but you need all those things to cooperate. So I would say, if that wasn't an issue, I think, and not killing yourself, I think 6-7 months is very realistic expectation to get your license.
What surprised you the most about the learning process? Was it the classroom? Was it the flying? Give me something that was unique that you said, wow, I didn't expect this.
You know, I wouldn't say there was anything about the flying. I think the struggle that I actually went through, the struggle I went through was a lot of flight schools, you'll get a lot of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed recent college graduates who they love aviation. Their ultimate goal is either to be a corporate pilot or a commercial pilot. I thought the FAA requires you to know a lot of detail, like weather. I'm like, I'm not going to be a weatherman, kind of thing. And this little bit of training isn't going to make me one. So where they're trying to have you look at the type of clouds, I think it's important to know when you're in trouble or could be getting into trouble. But some of the frustrations I had was a lot of flight schools are manned with certified flight instructors, so CFIs, that are freshly minted college graduates, people who went to school to get an aviation degree, who either want to go be a corporate pilot or go to the commercial airlines, and they want to build up hours. And as soon as they get their hours, boom, they're gone. And so I went through a couple of different instructors, and they definitely know how to fly. There's no doubt about that. They don't necessarily know how to teach. So I tell you, if your question is what would I do differently, I would take more time up front to find an instructor that I really meshed with, and I would definitely err on the side of someone more experienced, someone who's not rushing to go off to the airlines, and somebody who's done it enough that has good teaching techniques. Because how we learn it in our 50s and how you learn when you're in high school and college are quite different.
Totally different. That's probably the best advice of the podcast today. I wouldn't even thought about that. Your instructors, I'm thinking your career's an instructor, so you're always going to be an instructor. No, it sounds like they're, as you said, you've outlined people have different programs. They're an instructor just for a while till they can get to the next job or the next level.
But they're building up hours. When they fly with you, they're getting to log those hours. And it used to be that the airlines at 1,500 hours would take you into the regional airlines. And I think when I was going through it, there was a very strong demand for pilots. They were taking people at 1,000 hours. So they got to whatever the magic number the airlines wanted. They got that. The airline said yes, and I don't blame them. It's improving their careers, better compensation, all that kind of stuff. But I wish that I had taken the time or had known to say, I'm going to shop around to make sure I've got a seasoned pilot who's dedicated to instruction, enjoys doing that. It's not just a stepping stone to further up the aviation ladder.
Tell me about your first solo flight. Scary, freeing?
It was definitely scary. They typically, I think this is the tradition, they typically don't tell you when you're going to solo. I mean, when you're in the neighborhood of soloing in terms of by the amount of time you've had with the instructor, the number of, or the maneuvers that you feel comfortable with, but you don't know the actual date. And it's probably just as well, because then you'd probably be fretting it. So my solo was, and this is something typically we would do because I'm in a very busy airport, a lot of corporate traffic. We would take off and we'd fly 15, 20 minutes away to an airport that was farther out, uncontrolled, so you don't have a tower and you don't have a lot of corporate guys flying in and out. And so we're practicing takeoffs and landing. And we're doing that. And on one of the landings, he says, okay, pull over here. He goes, I'm going to get out. I want you to go do 3 takeoffs and 3 landings. And you're like, well, because while the instructor's there, you have that safety net of, you can try and imagine that he's not there. But we all know that if something happens with the plane, with me, I do something I shouldn't do, the instructor is there to take over. So when he steps out the door, it's kind of like the first time I went, the only time I've gone skydiving. I had a 16-year-old nephew who wanted Uncle Mike to go skydiving with him. So I said, I'm going to do it. And you go and you see people skydiving all day and you say, well, that doesn't look so hard, until you get in that plane and you're up at 12,000 feet and the only way down is out the door. And I did that with a tandem. So I had an instructor, a guy who jumps multiple times a day, but it's still the whole thought of what if? So it was very much that kind of feeling. Now your training takes over, and I had no trouble with it, and you feel a great sense of accomplishment. But when he actually steps out the door and says, okay, go do 3 laps around the field, that's a little pucker factor.
Gosh, let me tell you, I can't imagine the kind of freedom you have. And you've been flying now for over 10 years. Tell me about your most memorable moment there, maybe a frightening one or just a glorious moment, a sunset, a sunrise. Tell me a memorable moment so far in your flying career.
Well, there's lots of those in terms of you're flying and you see sunrises, sunsets. Kind of for me, a real thrill is I can remember I was flying somewhere in Florida, and uh, my home airport is just a little bit north of Atlanta Hartsfield, and they take off and they had me fly right over the airport. I mean, all the five runways at Atlanta are east and west, and obviously I'm flying south, and they just had me at 5,000 feet going right over the heart of the airport. So you're sitting there saying, there's Delta, there's United, all those folks. And so you're like, hey, I'm up here with the big boys, which is kind of a nice feeling. So I think doing that, I've done the same thing at O'Hare. They've put me right between O'Hare and downtown Chicago. Having come from Chicago, it's a pretty neat thing to fly over places your house, sites that you know. And I've had the plane up the East Coast. I've had as far as Seattle, down to San Diego, down to Austin, Texas. I'd like to even be flying more. I've got some family constraints that make it not as easy to just pick up and go. But an example is I've got a friend up in Washington, D.C. The Atlanta Braves are going to be up there next week. And he said, why don't you just fly up? And he's got season tickets to the Nationals, and the Braves are going to be playing the Nationals. So I'm going to go fly up and go watch the Braves game. And I can remember coming out of COVID, and you could go fly your plane. They couldn't stop you from flying your plane. And here in the South, when they opened up earlier, I remember when they opened up Hilton Head. And so I said to my wife, why don't we pack a picnic lunch? We'll fly over to Hilton Head. We'll get a car. We'll go to the beach. So we went to the beach. We saw thousands of other people who had been cooped up. We went there, we had lunch, and we flew back home. And it's an hour and 15-minute flight from where we are. So you can do things like that. I can fly down to the Gulf of Mexico in less than an hour and a half, and just gives you a lot of freedom.
It lends itself to the question. You've got so much freedom now because you're a pilot. So it begs the question, how has it changed your sense of adventure in retirement and how you live your life day in and day out? Because you have the ultimate freedom, which comes from being financially stable in retirement. But now literally you can pop in a plane and do whatever you want to, go wherever you want to. How has it impacted what used to be confines of your life to total freedom?
Well, I come from a big family. I've got older brothers. I've got a brother in his early to mid 70s who's still working. I said, why are you working? Why are you still working? He said, well, I don't know what I would do if I was retired. And he got a little bit of taste of that during COVID because his business was really impacted by COVID. And just like me, when I was working, I was in such a pressure-packed job. You really, other than my weekend golf game, I really didn't have time to be developing hobbies, if you will, in retirement. So I think for a happy retirement, you need some interests, passions, hobbies, some structure. And flying does that for me. I get a lot of aviation magazines, materials, YouTube. If I'm bored, I'm just going to go flying. And people, today's a nice sunny day. People are like, oh, I bet it's great to fly. Well, actually, I prefer to fly on a day when the clouds are about 1,000 feet high and you're in the clouds, because then you're using all the technology of the plane. Flying on a bright, clear, sunny day is nice for your passengers, but for a pilot who wants to be a little bit more challenged and use the technology, you want to be up in the clouds, particularly if you're not getting bounced around. Because if you have nice, smooth air, but you're in the clouds, it's fun I know where I am, I'm in control, I'm using the autopilot, the avionics. That's really what I like to do. So it gives you some structure in retirement and interest and something you want to keep doing. And one of the things that I've done is it's just like when you're 16 and you get your driver's license, you're willing to drive that car anywhere. If your mother says, go to the store and get some milk, I'll go, because you just want to drive. Then after a while, you've driven enough that you say, I guarantee you, every time you get in the car, you're going somewhere. You're going to meet somebody, you're going to dinner, you're going to pick something up. You don't just say, well, let's go for a drive. And it's
You know,
similar in flying. If I haven't flown for a while, I will just go up and fly, or I might fly somewhere in South Carolina, have lunch, and come back. And I use it as I needed to have lunch and keep my skills up. But one of the things I've done is there's this organization here in the Southeast called Angel Flight, and so there's pilots like me that have their own plane, and they're a pilot, and we will fly people who are in need of medical treatment. So we'll fly them from wherever they are to that medical treatment, or from wherever they're getting treated back home. It's at our expense. We get a tax deduction for it, but the patient doesn't pay anything for it. And the patient they're not doing the 6, 7, 10-hour drive. And this is for patients that are doing like routine treatment. But then you also get the transplant patients. I'm not doing those because that's typically, maybe we've got a heart, we've got a liver, it could be 2 a.m. You need a jet, to get somebody back and forth kind of thing. But I'll routinely go and fly somebody. I might pick them up in Valdosta, Georgia, and fly them to Augusta, Georgia there's a big burn center treatment there. Pick somebody up in Jacksonville and fly them, to wherever. So it gives you you're flying and gives you a purpose. And to go back to the question you were asking, I'll fly to, I'm with a group of guys, we go on golf trips. Well, I'll fly if I can, if it's not, the West Coast, let's say, I'll fly my plane. And to me, half the fun is flying the plane and half the fun is the golf. So it gives you those kind of things, just like this baseball game up in Washington. I'm interested in seeing the Braves, but I'm really more interested in flying my plane. And it's kind of cool when you do things like you fly into the Washington, D.C. airspace. Given after 9/11, you cannot penetrate the Washington, D.C. airspace without permission. There's things you need to do, unless you want an F-18 on your tail, and this kind of thing. So the fun is in the flying and in the doing once you get there.
I get a little disconcerted. I'm a little disconcerted because flying makes me a little nervous. So whenever you say I love flying when it becomes a challenge, I just can't resonate with that, Mike. I know you, and I know what you're saying, but it's like, I don't think I want to fly with you if you're like, I want a challenge. Hey,
well, it's really to keep your skills up, and it's really important that being a private pilot only allows you to fly. You cannot fly in clouds, and so immediately upon getting my private license, I immediately went and did my training for my instrument, which was much faster. I didn't have the medical issue. You're really focused, and so it's hard for me to imagine being just a private pilot, because you can start the day, take off in clear skies, but wherever you're trying to go may not have clear skies, or weather might be developed en route, or you've got something, you want to plan to fly somewhere, and the forecast 2, 3, a week out looks good, but as the day gets there, it's not good. So it's hard for me to imagine not being an instrument-rated pilot as well.
I think the metaphor, when I think of those who are getting their pilot's license, it's about freedom. I can't think of anything that's more freeing than being a pilot and flying. So this is probably the most difficult question I'll ask you today. What is a perfect flying day? And this is saying you have freedom to go anywhere, touch down anywhere you want to do. Let's just say you don't have any constraints on the ground, and you decide, you wake up one day like, my perfect flying day today would be going where, doing what? Give me an example.
Well, to me, it'd probably be flying like within 2 hours and going somewhere like flying to North Carolina, maybe going to see where Devil Kills, where the Wright brothers
Kill Devil's Hill.
Kill Devil, flying there, and to see, where the first flight was, or like we did during COVID, we're just going to go to the beach for the day and come back. You would never do that drive because it's going to be a 5-hour drive back and forth, and you're just not going to do it. So the freedom to say, let's just go. And to me, the ideal is when you have nice, smooth air. The smooth air to me is a much bigger deal than clear air, because there's plenty of days and it's bright sunny skies and it's turbulent. And I'm comfortable with a fair amount of turbulence. Your passengers aren't very comfortable. It's just so much nicer when you have smooth air. I remember taking a couple of people to up to a Notre Dame football game, and it was two women, and that I knew actually from the club, and they had gotten tickets, and I like football, and so I said, "You get the tickets, I'll fly you there." Well, they got the tickets, so we had tickets, we had accommodations. I flew them up, and I remember them saying, "Oh, everybody, oh, that's a small plane. You don't want to get in a small plane." Oh, I would never do that. And so people had them pretty revved up about how scary it was going to be, and they were like, "This is fantastic." We had a nice, smooth air. It was 2.5, maybe 3 hours at most up to South Bend. Saw the game, went out to dinner, flew back home. They loved it. So it gives you the freedom to do those kinds of things.
So our audience are people that are in their 50s or 60s, and some are beyond. So for those who are kind of entering the retirement phase and they're looking at this as being a potential hobby in retirement, what advice would you give them as they're considering this path?
Well, I think it's, are you healthy? So can you pass the medical and be okay there? Do you have the desire to continue to learn, which I certainly do, and the challenge of all the things that you have to do. I think some of the most difficult things about flying, particularly when in the learning phase, is the radio, because there's dealing with controllers, and there's protocols for dealing with that. And I would say that's, in some ways, it's the scariest thing for people. But so if you have that desire to learn, if you have that desire of adventure, and you're still an active person, because I think if you're a more sedentary person, I don't think it would be as rewarding for that person. But if you have that sense of adventure, want to try new things, go different places, meet other people, it's a great thing to do.
So what are your aspirations as a pilot moving forward? People have different levels of flight expertise, single engines, double engine. I mean, they've got different things. Jets, do you have aspiration to have your own Challenger, your own G5? Or tell me, is there an evolution that you're taking to the next level? Or have you thought about that and you've decided not to, and why?
Well, it's interesting. So I've got a plane that's called a Cirrus. It's a single engine piston plane. It's the most popular single engine plane, and has been for the last 15 plus years. A real unique aspect of it is my airframe has a parachute. So if my engine died, if there was some other mechanical issue, there's literally a handle that I can pull, and a parachute is rocket propelled out of the ceiling of my plane and will float down. To my knowledge, anybody who's ever pulled the chute within the specifications, and by that you can't be 200 miles an hour in a dive and pull the chute. It's but very reasonable. For example, I think one time where somebody may not have survived it, they got into icing. The plane got so iced up that they were aerodynamically incapable of flying. And once you lose your wings and your tail and your elevator, you're basically just a rock. And so the rock's going to fall. The parachute, it just overwhelmed the parachute. But I've talked to two people who pulled the chute and have just walked away. So I've thought about moving up to the jet, because Cirrus has a single engine jet that also has a parachute. And it's a big number, $3.5 million now for that. I think if you get into the jet category, you really need missions that justify that. And by that, I mean, if I haven't flown for a week or 2 weeks, I'll just say to my wife, I'm going to go fly over to Augusta. I'm going to cruise around Augusta National and come back. Or I might fly up to Greenville and have lunch, and I'll be back, which is getting something to do, kind of getting your skills, push all the buttons kind of thing. You're not going to do that in a jet. The jet burns a lot more fuel, particularly at low altitude. And you typically, you want to be flying, the Cirrus jet flies at 30 or 31,000 feet. To be efficient, you want to be there. You're going from Atlanta to Chicago routinely. I mean, I do that in my plane too, but you're not just going to say, hey, let's go out for a joyride kind of thing. And so, and you have to be type rated for the jet. There's more, I'll say, qualifications and recurrent training that's involved. And that's not me. I'm the typical general aviation pilot who's serious about it, but I'm not trying to mess with the boys in the Boeing 777s and those kinds of things.
So the friend of mine who took his G5 from Atlanta to Augusta to watch the Masters, that's kind of a waste of gas, I would imagine.
Oh my gosh, it's unbelievable.
Because the takeoff alone is.
It's amazing, to get rated. Obviously, he's got to have somebody flying that for him. And if he's doing it, he says if he's his own pilot, then he's really. It would take a lot of training and hours, and to be safe at doing that, you need to be flying that a lot. So it's hard to imagine how you could have a job and have enough time to be able to do that.
Definitely a retirement thing.
When you're 2 hours away to take a G5, you're spending a lot of money.
So to your point, you're going to the jet level. You love being just a regional hopper going up and down. But if you're flying a jet, just the takeoff alone is burning so much fuel. Unless you're a 3-hour flight out to South Dakota or somewhere a long way, you're just burning money, so to speak, or it's not worth the extra cost and the power just to be short term.
And what I would say about like the plane that I have, I can fly first class and be way financially better off flying commercially. But to me, the love is in, I like the challenge. I want to fly. This is something fun to do. I like the freedom. I'm not having to mess around with TSA lines when the politics are such that it's just a nuisance to go through. And my wife, she has some health problems that going through TSA in a commercial airport is something we really can't do. So to have the freedom is big. But you don't fly because it's going to be cheaper than going commercial. You can fly first class, and it's going to be cheaper to fly first class anywhere you go than to do it yourself.
But the freedom alone in and of itself, and this is probably for my legal friends who everything is on an hourly basis. If you have to spend 2 hours going to Hartsfield, go through the line at TSA, get on your first class flight to go everywhere you are, if you're thinking of that terms, by the time you pop in at PDK, take off, go to see a Cubbies game, you're in and out before they would even think about getting in and out. And I said that's probably a bad example. Greenville's a better example because a jet can get to Chicago faster than you can, but the lines that you have to go through, if you're flying, is just not worth it sometimes.
Well, I remember that we were on a golf trip a couple of years ago up in Sand Valley, so in the heart of Wisconsin, and the other guys were going to the airport to fly to Madison or whatever and connect, somewhere, and then come down and I got to my plane, loaded up, and took off. And even though the commercial plane will fly a little bit more than twice my speed, because basically my plane is 200 miles an hour, plus or minus the wind. And you're going a little bit more than 500 miles an hour in a commercial plane once you're at cruise. But like you say, you don't have to get there 2 hours earlier, and the traffic going through there and waiting for your baggage and all that kind of stuff. So it certainly can be more efficient time-wise. But I don't want to fool anybody that you save money. It's like having a boat. You may not want to own a boat. You want to have a good friend who's got a boat and wants to take you out on a boat.
The best things in life are my friends who have planes, jets, planes, and the ones who have boats, because they're expensive hobbies. And, and I'll say this in passing, for the friends of ours who do have airplanes, and I'm thinking of one in particular as a jet, and I know I can't afford that, and they are gracious to invite me. And the line was given to me. He said, Duncan, I've got 14 seats on this jet. Regardless of whether you and my 13 buddies are going to come with me, I'm still going to take the jet, and I'd rather do it with my friends than having 13 empty seats for the same place I'm going to go to. And that was a great way and a great experience. So,
yeah. Well, I think some other way I think about it, you can't take it with you. So it's something I've always wanted to do and do it. But then you are able to help people out. I've had, this is recently, a friend of ours has a parent who's in hospice, and they got the call that, time may be short. And so they needed a flight. It was about a just under a 2-hour flight. But I was able to meet them at the airport at 9 o'clock on a Sunday, fly them up there. They spent 5 or 6 hours with their parent, and then we flew back home. Whereas if they had driven, it would have been the entire weekend. It would have been fatigued from the driving or anticipation of the drive back. So I was able to help somebody out that, it made it very easy for them. I got to fly. I was doing a good deed. And so it was, win-win.
That's a wonderful thing. In closing reflections, give me advice that you would have for our friends entering into retirement and contemplating the flying experience. What closing words of wisdom would you give to them as they contemplate this?
Well, I think, do they want to make the commitment to the learning process? I really don't think it's that hard in terms of learning, but do they want to learn? Do they want to be challenged in that way? And then if they do the discovery flight and say, yes, I really want to do this, then I would say take the time to find a good flight school with a good instructor that you have a connection with, a rapport, I really should say a rapport, and then off you go. I've loved all of it. Even, you've got mechanical things and stuff goes on. And, I've just added with Starlink internet capability to my plane. So I was recently, I did this about 2 months ago. I can FaceTime call people. People can be watching Netflix, not me, but my passengers can be watching Netflix. But I was calling my pilot friend, and he lives in Washington. He's the state of Washington. And I was calling him, and he said, I FaceTimed him. And he said, "Oh, good, you got me just before going to bed." And it was 2 p.m. What do you mean? And he goes, "Oh, well, I'm in Africa." And so he's in Africa, and I'm on the plane flying back from Chicago, and we're having a nice FaceTime call. So it's just that freedom to be able to do stuff to help people out and to have something that that you really like and challenges you in retirement. Because I think you definitely need some kind of challenge to stay fresh, to keep young, to keep learning.
Well said. Mike Kiepura, you're a good friend. Thank you so much for being on the Retirement Spy. Remember, everybody who's listening, please hit subscribe so we can keep bringing you some great content like this. Mike, thank you so much.
Hey, you're welcome. No problem, Duncan. I had a lot of fun doing it.